Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 30th issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Israel says it will halt operations of several humanitarian organizations in Gaza starting in 2026. Israel on Tuesday said it will suspend more than 24 humanitarian organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, for failing to meet its new rules to vet international organizations working in the Gaza Strip. The Ministry of Diaspora Affairs said that organizations facing bans on January 1st didn't meet new requirements for sharing staff, funding, and operations information. It accused Doctors Without Borders, one of the largest health organizations operating in Gaza, of failing to clarify the roles of some staff that Israel accused of cooperation with Hamas and other militant groups. International organizations have said that Israel's rules are arbitrary and could endanger staff. The ministry said that around 25 organizations, or 15% of non-governmental organizations working in Gaza, didn't have their permits renewed. Doctors Without Borders, also known by its French acronym MSF, didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Israel previously accused its staff of involvement in military activities in Gaza in 2024. At the time, the group said that it would never knowingly employ people engaged in military activity. Other major organizations whose permits weren't renewed include the Norwegian Refugee Council, CARE International, the International Rescue Committee, and divisions of major charities such as Oxfam and Caritas, according to a list from the ministry. The organizations help with a variety of social services, including food distribution, healthcare, disability services, education, and mental health. Israel and international organizations have been at odds over the amount of aid going into Gaza. Israel says it's upholding the aid commitments laid out in the latest ceasefire that took effect October 10th, but humanitarian organizations dispute Israel's numbers and say more aid is desperately needed in the devastated Palestinian territory of more than 2 million people. New regulations. Earlier this year, Israel changed its registration process for aid groups, which included a requirement to submit a list of staff, including Palestinians in Gaza. Some aid groups say that they didn't submit the list of Palestinian staff for fear they'd be targeted by Israel and because of data protection laws in Europe. It comes from a legal and safety perspective. In Gaza, we saw hundreds of aid workers get killed, said Shina Lowe, communications advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council. The decision not to renew aid groups' licenses means offices in Israel and East Jerusalem will close and organizations won't be able to send international staff or aid into Gaza. Despite the ceasefire, the needs in Gaza are enormous, and yet we and dozens of other organizations are and will continue to be blocked from bringing in essential life-saving assistance, Lowe said. Not being able to send staff into Gaza means all of the workload falls on our exhausted local staff. Israel says exploitation unwelcome. The decision means the aid groups will have their license revoked on January 1st, and if they are located in Israel, they will need to leave by March 1st, according to the ministry. The message is clear. Humanitarian assistance is welcome. The exploitation of humanitarian frameworks for terrorism is not, said Amachi Chikli, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism. The Israeli defense body that oversees humanitarian aid to Gaza, Kogat, said that the organizations on the list contribute less than 1% of the total aid going into the Gaza Strip, and that help will continue to enter from more than 20 organizations that did receive permits to continue operating in Gaza. The registration process is intended to prevent the exploitation of aid by Hamas, which in the past operated under the cover of certain international aid organizations, knowingly or unknowingly, Kogat said in a statement. This isn't the first time Israel has tried to crack down on international humanitarian organizations. Throughout the war, Israel has accused the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, of being infiltrated by Hamas, using its facilities, and taking aid. The United Nations has denied it. Israel also has said that hundreds of Palestinian militants work for UNRWA, the top UN agency working with Palestinians. UNRWA has denied knowingly aiding armed groups and says it acts quickly to purge any suspected militants. After months of criticism from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right allies, Israel banned UNRWA from operating on its territory in January. The U.S., formerly the largest donor to UNRWA, halted funding to the agency in early 2024. NGOs say Israel vague over data use. Israel failed to confirm that the data collected from the new regulations wouldn't be used for military or intelligence purposes, raising serious security concerns, said Athena Rayburn, the executive director of AIDA, an umbrella organization representing over 100 organizations that operate in the Palestinian territories. She noted that more than 500 aid workers have been killed in Gaza during the war. Agreeing for a party to the conflict to vet our staff, especially under the conditions of occupation, is a violation of humanitarian principles, specifically neutrality and independence, she said. Rayburn said organizations expressed their concerns and offered alternatives to submitting staff lists, such as third-party vetting, but that Israel refused to engage in any dialogue. After quiet off-year elections, Democrats renew worries about Trump interfering in the midterms. If history is a guide, Republicans stand a good chance of losing control of the House of Representatives in 2026. They have just a slim majority in the chamber, and the incumbent party usually gives up seats in midterm elections. President Donald Trump, whose loss of the House halfway through his first term led to 2 impeachments, is trying to keep history from repeating, and doing so in ways his opponents say are intended to manipulate next year's election landscape. He has rallied his party to remake congressional maps across the country, to create more conservative-leaning House seats, an effort that could end up backfiring on him. He's directed his administration to target Democratic politicians, activists, and donors, and Democrats worry he's flexing his muscles to intervene in the midterms, like no administration ever has. Democrats and other critics point to how Trump has sent the military into Democratic cities over the objections of Democratic mayors and governors. They note that he's pushed the Department of Homeland Security to be so aggressive that at one point its agents handcuffed a Democratic U.S. Senator, and some warn that a Republican-controlled Congress could fail to seat winning candidates if Democrats reclaim the House majority, recalling Trump's efforts to stay in power even after voters rejected him in 2020, leading to the violent attack by his supporters on the U.S. Capitol. Regarding potential military deployments, Ken Martin, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, told the Associated Press, "What he's going to do is send those troops there and keep them there all the way through the next election, because guess what? If people are afraid of leaving their house, they're probably not going to leave their house to go vote on Election Day. That's how he stays in power." Military to the polls or fear-mongering. Democrats sounded similar alarms just before November's elections, and yet there were no significant incidents. California Governor Gavin Newsom, a frequent Trump antagonist who also warns about a federal crackdown on voting in 2026, predicted that masked immigration agents would show up at the polls in his state, where voters were considering a ballot measure to counter Trump's redistricting push. There were no such incidents in November, and the measure to redraw California's congressional lines in response to Trump's efforts elsewhere won in a landslide. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson said the concerns about the midterms come from Democratic politicians who are fear-mongering to score political points with the radical left flank of the Democratic Party that they are courting ahead of their doomed-to-fail presidential campaigns. She described their concerns as baseless conspiracy theories. Susan Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, denied that Trump was planning to use the military to try to suppress votes. "I say it is categorically false, will not happen. It's just wrong-headed," she told Vanity Fair for an interview that was published earlier in December. DNC litigation director Dan Freeman said he hasn't seen an indication that Trump will send immigration enforcement agents to polling places during the midterms, but is wary. He said the DNC filed public records requests in an attempt to learn more about any such plans and is drafting legal pleadings it could file if Trump sends armed federal agents to the polls or otherwise intervenes in the elections. "We're not taking their word for it," Freeman said in an interview. "States, not presidents, run elections." November's off-year elections may not be the best indicator of what could lie ahead. They were scattered in a handful of states, and Trump showed only modest interest until late in the fall when his Department of Justice announced it was sending federal monitors to California and New Jersey to observe voting in a handful of counties. It was a bureaucratic step that had no impact on voting, even as it triggered alarm from Democrats. Alexandra Chandler, the legal director of Protect Democracy, a group that has clashed with Trump over his role in elections, said she was heartened by the lack of drama during the 2025 voting. "We have so many positive signs we can look to," Chandler said, citing not only a quiet election, but GOP senators' resistance to Trump's demands to eliminate the filibuster and the widespread resistance to Trump's demand that television host Jimmy Kimmel lose his job because of his criticism of the president. "There are limits on Trump's power," she noted. "We will have elections in 2026, Chandler said. "People don't have to worry about that." Under the Constitution, a president has limited tools to intervene in elections, which are run by the states. Congress can help set rules for federal elections, but states administer their own election operations and oversee the counting of ballots. When Trump tried to single-handedly revise election rules with a sweeping executive order shortly after returning to office, the court stepped in and stopped him, citing the lack of a constitutional role for the president. Trump later promised another order, possibly targeting mail ballots and voting machines, but it has yet to materialize. DOJ voter data requests should frighten everybody. Still, there's plenty of ways a president can cause problems, said Rick Hazen, a UCLA law professor. Trump unsuccessfully pushed Georgia's top election official to find him enough votes to be declared the winner there in 2020 and could try similar tactics in Republican-dominated states in November. Likewise, Hazen said Trump could spread misinformation to undermine confidence in vote tallies, as he has done routinely ahead of elections. It's harder to do that in more lopsided contests, as many in 2025 turned into, Hazen noted. Concerns about Trump interfering in 2026 are real. They're not frivolous, Hazen said. They're also not likely, but these are things people need to be on guard for. One administration move that has alarmed election officials is a federal demand from his Department of Justice for detailed voter data from the states. The administration has sued the District of Columbia and at least 21 states, most of them controlled by Democrats, after they refused to turn over all the information the DOJ sought. What the DOJ is trying to do is something that should frighten everybody across the political spectrum, said David Becker, a former Justice Department voting rights attorney and executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. They're trying to use the power of the executive to bully states into turning over highly sensitive data, date of birth, social security numbers, driver's license, the holy trinity of identity theft, hand it over to the DOJ for who knows what use. Voter protection versus election integrity. Voting rights lawyers and election officials have been preparing for months for the midterms, trying to ensure there are ways to counter misinformation and ensure state election systems are easy to explain. Both major parties are expected to stand up significant campaigns around the mechanics of voting. Democrats mounting what they call voter protection effort to monitor for problems, while Republicans focus on what they call election integrity. Freeman, the DNC litigation director who previously worked in the DOJ's voting section, said his hiring this year was part of a larger effort by the DNC to beef up its in-house legal efforts ahead of the midterms. He said the committee has been filling gaps in voting rights law enforcement that the DOJ has typically covered, including informing states that they can't illegally purge citizens from their voter rolls. Tina Barton, co-chair of the Committee on Safe and Secure Elections, a coalition of law enforcement and election officials who advise jurisdictions on de-escalation and how to respond to emergencies at polling places, says interest in the group's trainings has exploded in recent weeks. There's a lot at stake, and that's going to cause a lot of emotions, Barton said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Surge in federal officers in Minnesota focuses on alleged fraud at daycare centers. A surge of federal officers in Minnesota follows new allegations of fraud by daycare centers run by Somali residents. President Donald Trump has previously linked his administration's immigration crackdown against Minnesota's large Somali community to a series of fraud cases involving government programs in which most of the defendants have roots in the East African country. Surge in federal officers. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and FBI Director Kash Patel both announced an increase in operations in Minnesota this week. The move comes after a right-wing influencer posted a video Friday claiming he had found that daycare centers operated by Somali residents in Minneapolis had committed up to $100 million in fraud. Tiki Brown, commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families, said at a Monday news conference that state regulators took the influencer's allegations seriously. Noem posted on social media that officers were conducting a massive investigation on child care and other rampant fraud. Patel said the intent was to dismantle large-scale fraud schemes exploiting federal programs. Past fraud in Minnesota. Minnesota has been under the spotlight for years for Medicaid fraud, including a massive $300 million pandemic fraud case involving the nonprofit Feeding Our Future. Prosecutors said it was the country's largest COVID-19 related fraud scam, and that defendants exploited a state-run, federally funded program intended to provide food for children. In 2022, during President Joe Biden's administration, 47 people were charged. The number of defendants has grown to 78 throughout the ongoing investigation. So far, 57 people have been convicted, either because they pleaded guilty or lost at trial. Most of the defendants are of Somali descent. Numerous other fraud cases are being investigated, including new allegations focused on child care centers. In news interviews and press releases over the summer, Prosecutor Joe Thompson estimated the total loss from all fraud cases could exceed $1 billion. Earlier this month, a federal prosecutor alleged that half or more of the roughly $18 billion in federal funds that supported 14 programs in Minnesota since 2018 may have been stolen. Crackdown targeting Somalis. Trump's immigration enforcement in Minnesota has focused on the Somali community in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which is the largest in the country. Trump labeled Minnesota Somalis as garbage and said he didn't want them in the U.S. About 84,000 of the 260,000 Somalis in the U.S. live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. The overwhelming majority are U.S. citizens. Almost 58% were born in the U.S., and 87% of the foreign-born are naturalized citizens. Among those running schemes to get funds for child nutrition, housing services, and autism programs, 82 of the 92 defendants are Somali Americans, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for Minnesota. Republicans have tried to blame Walz. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the 2024 Democratic vice presidential nominee, has said fraud will not be tolerated, and his administration will continue to work with federal partners to ensure fraud is stopped and fraudsters are caught. The fraud could be a major issue in the 2026 gubernatorial race as Walz seeks a third term. Walz has said an audit due by late January should give a better picture of the extent of the fraud, but allowed that the $1 billion estimate could be accurate. He said his administration is taking aggressive action to prevent additional fraud. He has long defended how his administration responded. Minnesota's most prominent Somali American, Democratic U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar, has urged people not to blame an entire community for the actions of a relative few. European and Canadian leaders discuss U.S.-led peace efforts in Russia-Ukraine war. Leaders from Europe and Canada held talks Tuesday on U.S.-led peace efforts to end the nearly 4-year war between Russia and Ukraine, as Moscow and Kiev sparred over Russian claims, denied by Ukraine, of a mass drone attack on a lakeside residence used by President Vladimir Putin. The virtual meeting included European leaders as well as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, heads of European institutions, and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, according to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Peace is on the horizon, Tusk told a Polish cabinet meeting, but he added it is still far from 100% certainty. It was the first meeting of European leaders since U.S. President Donald Trump hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at his Florida resort on Sunday. Trump insisted that Ukraine and Russia are closer than ever before to a peace settlement, although he acknowledged that outstanding obstacles could still prevent a deal. Zelensky on Tuesday announced plans for upcoming meetings with officials from about 30 countries, dubbed the Coalition of the Willing, which support Kiev's effort to end the war with Russia on acceptable terms. National security advisors from those countries aim to meet in Ukraine on January 3rd, followed by a meeting of the country's leaders on January 6th in France, he said on social media. He thanked Trump administration officials for their readiness to participate, but provided no further details. We are moving the peace process forward, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who attended Tuesday talks, said in a post on X. Transparency and honesty are now required from everyone, including Russia. His pointed reference to Russia came after Russian and Ukrainian officials exchanged bitter accusations over Moscow's allegations that Ukraine attempted to attack the Russian leader's residence in northwestern Russia with 91 long-range drones, almost immediately after Trump's Sunday talks with Zelensky. The claims and counterclaims threatened to derail peace efforts. I don't like it. It's not good, Trump said Monday, after Putin told him by phone about the alleged attack. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha noted Tuesday that Russia still hasn't provided any plausible evidence to support its allegations. Moscow won't do so because no such attack happened, he wrote on X. Russia has a long record of false claims, he added, referencing the Kremlin's denials it intended to attack Ukraine ahead of its February 24, 2022 all-out invasion of its neighbor. Zelensky, speaking Monday, also branded the allegation as another lie from Moscow designed to sabotage peace efforts. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov countered Tuesday that the alleged Ukrainian attack is aiming at thwarting President Trump's efforts to promote a peaceful resolution to the war. Russia and Ukraine have throughout the war exchanged accusations about attacks that cannot be independently verified because of the fighting. Peskov didn't say whether Moscow would prevent physical evidence of the attack, such as drone wreckage, saying that such a step would be a matter for Russia's military. "I don't think there needs to be any evidence here," he said. The rural Novgorod region is home to one of the Russian presidency's official residences, Dolgy Borody, close to the town of Valdai, about 250 miles northwest of Moscow. The area has been used to host a vacation retreat for high-ranking government officials since the Soviet era. The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington think tank, said that since Trump launched a diplomatic push at the start of the year to end the war, the Kremlin has sought to delay and prolong peace negotiations in order to continue its war undisturbed, prevent the U.S. from imposing measures intended to pressure Russia into meaningful negotiations, and even to extract concessions about bilateral U.S.-Russian relations. Iran's president says answer to attack would be harsh in apparent response to Trump warning. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian on Tuesday said his country's answer to an attack would be harsh, which appeared to be in response to a warning by U.S. President Donald Trump over reconstruction of Iran's nuclear program. Answer of Islamic Republic of Iran to any cruel aggression will be harsh and discouraging, Pezeshkian said on the social media platform X. Pezeshkian did not elaborate, but his statement came a day after Trump suggested the U.S. could carry out military strikes if Iran attempts to reconstitute its nuclear program. Trump made the comment during wide-ranging talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. "Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again," Trump said during a news conference with Netanyahu after their meeting. "And if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them. But hopefully that's not happening." The two leaders discussed the possibility of renewed military action against Iran, months after a 12-day air war in June that killed nearly 1,100 Iranians, including senior military commanders and scientists. Iran's retaliatory missile barrage killed 28 people in Israel. Trump suggested Monday that he could order another U.S. strike against Iran. "If it's confirmed, they know the consequences, and the consequences will be very powerful, maybe more powerful than the last time," Trump said. Pezeshkian said Saturday that tensions between the sides already had risen. "We are in a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe. They don't want our country to remain stable," he said. Iran has insisted it is no longer enriching uranium at any site in the country, trying to signal to the West that it remains open to potential negotiations over its atomic program. U.S. intelligence agencies and the International Atomic Energy Agency assessed Iran last had an organized nuclear weapons program in 2003, though Tehran had been enriching uranium up to 60%, which is a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels of 90%. The year's first meteor shower and supermoon clash in January skies. The year's first supermoon and meteor shower will sync up in January skies, but the light from one may dim the other. The quadrantid meteor shower peaks Friday night into Saturday morning, according to the American Meteor Society. In dark skies during the peak, sky gazers typically see around 25 meters per hour, but this time the likely glimpse less than 10 per hour due to light from Saturday's supermoon. "The biggest enemy of enjoying a meteor shower is the full moon," said Mike Shanahan, planetarium director at Liberty Science Center in New Jersey. Meteor showers happen when speedy space rocks collide with Earth's atmosphere, burning up and leaving fiery tails in their wake, the end of a shooting star. A handful of meteors are visible on any given night, but predictable showers appear annually when Earth passes through dense streams of cosmic debris. Supermoons occur when a full moon is closer to Earth in its orbit. That makes it appear up to 14% bigger and 30% brighter than the faintest moon of the year, according to NASA. That difference can be tough to notice with the naked eye. Supermoons, like all full moons, are visible in clear skies everywhere that it's night. The quadrantids, on the other hand, can be seen mainly from the northern hemisphere. Both can be glimpsed without any special equipment. To spot the quadrantids, venture out in the early evening away from city lights and watch for fireballs before the moon crashes the party, said Jack Benitez with the Morrison Planetarium at the California Academy of Sciences. Skygazers can also try looking during early dawn hours on Sunday. Wait for your eyes to get used to the darkness and don't look at your phone. The space rocks will look like fast-moving white dots and appear over the whole sky. Meteor showers are named for the constellation where the fireballs appear to come from. The quadrantids, space debris from the asteroid 2003 EH1, are named for a constellation that's no longer recognized. The next major meteor shower, called the Lyrids, is slotted for April. Supermoons happen a few times a year and come in groups, taking advantage of the sweet spot in the moon's elliptical orbit. Saturday night's event ends a 4-month streak that started in October. There won't be another supermoon until the end of 2026. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In a tumultuous year, U.S. health policy has been dramatically reshaped under RFK Jr. In the whirlwind first year of President Donald Trump's second term, some of the most polarizing changes have taken place within the Department of Health and Human Services, where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has openly rebuffed the medical establishment as he converts the ideas of his Make America Health Again movement into public policy. Since entering office in February, the health secretary has overseen a dramatic reshaping of the agencies he oversees, including eliminating thousands of jobs and freezing or canceling billions of dollars for scientific research. As part of his campaign against chronic disease, he has redrawn the government's position on topics such as seed oils, fluoride, and Tylenol. He also has repeatedly used his authority to promote discredited ideas about vaccines. The department's rapid transformation has garnered praise from MAHA supporters who say they long viewed HHS as corrupt and untrustworthy and have been waiting for such a disruption. And both Democrats and Republicans have applauded some of the agency's actions, including efforts to encourage healthy eating and exercise, and deals to lower the prices of costly drugs. But many of the drastic changes Kennedy has led at the department are raising grave concerns among doctors and public health experts. At least in the immediate or intermediate future, the United States is going to be hobbled and hollowed out in its scientific leadership, said Lawrence Gostin, a Georgetown University public health law professor who was removed from a National Institutes of Health Advisory Board earlier this year with a letter that said he was no longer needed. I think it will be extraordinarily difficult to reverse all the damage. HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon denied any threat to scientific expertise at the agency and lauded its work. In 2025, the department confronted long-standing public health challenges with transparency, courage, and gold standard science, Nixon said in a statement. HHS will carry this momentum into 2026 to strengthen accountability, put patients first, and protect public health. The overhaul comes alongside broader uncertainties in the nation's health system, including Medicaid cuts passed by Congress this year and expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies that are putting millions of Americans' insurance coverage in jeopardy. Here's a closer look at Kennedy's first year leading the nation's health agency. Kennedy's vaccine views ripple across the department. After many years spent publicly assailing vaccines, Kennedy sought during his confirmation process to reassure senators he wouldn't take a wrecking ball to vaccine science. But less than a year later, his health department has repeatedly pushed the limits of those commitments. In May, Kennedy announced the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention would no longer recommend COVID-19 vaccines for healthy children and pregnant women, a move immediately questioned by public health experts who saw no new data to justify the change. In June, Kennedy fired an entire 17-member CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee, later installing several of his own replacements, including multiple vaccine skeptics. That group has made decisions that have shocked medical professionals, including declining to recommend COVID-19 shots for anyone, adding new restrictions on a combination shot against chickenpox, measles, mumps, and rubella, and reversing the long-standing recommendation that all babies receive a hepatitis B shot at birth. Kennedy in November also personally directed the CDC to abandon its position that vaccines do not cause autism without supplying any new evidence to support the change, while he left the old language on the website to keep a promise he made to Republican Senator Bill Cassidy. He added a disclaimer saying it remained because of the agreement. Public health researchers and advocates strongly refute the updated website and note that scientists have thoroughly explored the issue in rigorous research spanning decades, all pointing to the same conclusion that vaccines don't cause autism. Kennedy has promised a wide-ranging effort to study environmental factors that potentially contribute to autism, and in an Oval Office event with Trump in September, promoted unproven and in some cases discredited ties between Tylenol, vaccines, and the complex brain disorder. Kennedy reconfigures HHS with massive staffing and research cuts. Within 2 months of taking office, Kennedy announced a sweeping restructuring of HHS that would shut down entire agencies, consolidate others into a new one focused on chronic disease, and lay off some 10,000 employees on top of 10,000 others who had already taken buyouts. While parts of the effort are still tied up in court, thousands of the mass layoffs were allowed to stand. Those involuntary departures significantly thinned out the sprawling $1.7 trillion department, which oversees food and hospital inspections, health insurance for roughly half of the country, and vaccine recommendations. Kennedy has also fired or forced out several leaders at HHS, among them 4 directors at the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration's former vaccine chief, and a director of the CDC, whom he had hired less than a month earlier. On top of staffing cuts, he has overseen significant cuts to scientific research. That includes NIH slashing billions of dollars in research projects and the termination of $500 million in contracts to develop vaccines using mRNA technology. Amid the cuts, Kennedy has proposed or funded some new research on topics related to his MAHA goals, including autism, Lyme disease, and food additives. MAHA gains momentum despite some stumbles. Kennedy started using the phrase MAHA on the campaign trail last year to describe his crusade against toxic exposures and childhood chronic disease, but 2025 was the year it became ingrained in the national lexicon. In his tenure so far, the health secretary has made it the centerpiece of his work, using the Maha branding to wage war on ultra-processed foods, pressure companies to phase out artificial food dyes, criticize fluoride in drinking water, and push to ban junk food from the program that subsidizes grocery store runs for low-income Americans. The idea has even spread beyond Kennedy's agency across the federal government. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has appeared with Kennedy to promote fitness with pull-up displays. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy teamed up with Kennedy in early December to announce $1 billion in funding for airports to install resources like playgrounds and nursing pods for mothers and babies. And Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin recently announced he is working toward unveiling a MAHA agenda with health-related goals for his own department. MAHA has earned widespread popularity among the American public, even as it has endured some administration foibles. In May, for example, HHS faced scrutiny for releasing a MAHA report that contained several citations to studies that didn't exist. But to the extent that the initiative has included calls to action that aren't based on science, such as urging distrust in vaccines or promoting raw milk, which is far more likely than pasteurized milk to lead to illness, critics say it can be dangerous. Turkish police detained 357 suspects in raids against the Islamic State group. Turkish police carried out further large-scale operations against the Islamic State group across Turkey on Tuesday, detaining 357 suspects, the Interior Minister said. The raids came a day after a deadly clash in the northwestern province of Yalova, where 3 police officers and 6 IS militants were killed. 8 other officers and a night guard were wounded when police stormed a house used as a hideout. Turkey has launched a series of operations against suspected IS cells in the past week, following reports that operatives were planning attacks targeting Christmas and New Year celebrations, authorities said. On Tuesday, police carried out simultaneous raids in 21 provinces, including in Istanbul, Ankara, and Yalova, and detained 357 suspects, Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya said in a statement posted on X. He did not provide further details. Earlier, the Istanbul Chief Prosecutor's Office said 110 suspects were detained in raids on 114 addresses. Some of the suspects were linked to the militants who opened fire against police in Yalova, while others were suspected of planning possible attacks around New Year's Day, it said. Several of the detainees are suspected of collecting money under the guise of charity and funneling it to IS-linked networks in Syria, according to the prosecutor's office. In Ankara, police detained 17 suspects in raids, including 11 foreign nationals, authorities said, adding that police had found digital material linking them to IS fighters in conflict zones. IS has carried out a series of deadly attacks in Turkey, most notably a shooting at an Istanbul nightclub during New Year celebrations on January 1st, 2017, which killed 39 people. Thieves drill into a German bank vault and steal tens of millions of euros worth of property. Thieves stole tens of millions of euros worth of property from safety deposit boxes inside a German bank vault that they drilled into Monday during the holiday lull, police said. Some 2,700 bank customers were affected by the theft in Gelsenkirchen, police and the Sparkas Bank said. Thomas Novasic, a police spokesperson, said investigators believe the theft was worth between 10 and 90 million euros, or 11.7 to $105.7 million. German news agency dpa reported that the theft could be one of Germany's largest heists. The bank remained closed Tuesday when some 200 people showed up demanding to get inside, DPA reported. A fire alarm summoned police officers and firefighters to the bank branch shortly before 4 a.m. Monday. They found a hole in the wall and the vault ransacked. Police believe a large drill was used to break through the vault's basement wall. Witnesses told investigators they saw several men carrying large bags in a nearby parking garage over the weekend. Video footage from the garage shows masked people inside a stolen vehicle early Monday, police said. Gelsenkirchen is about 119 miles northwest of Frankfurt. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. U.S. removal of panels honoring black soldiers at World War II cemetery in the Netherlands draws backlash. Ever since a U.S. military cemetery in the southern Netherlands removed 2 displays recognizing black troops who helped to liberate Europe from the Nazis, visitors have filled the guest book with objections. Sometime in the spring, the American Battle Monuments Commission, the U.S. government agency responsible for maintaining memorial sites outside of the United States, removed the panels from the Visitors Center at the American Cemetery in Margraten, the final resting place for roughly 8,300 U.S. soldiers set in rolling hills near the border with Belgium and Germany. The move came after U.S. President Donald Trump issued a series of executive orders ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Our country will be woke no longer, Trump said in an address to Congress in March. The removal, carried out without public explanation, has angered Dutch officials, the families of U.S. soldiers, and the local residents who honor the American sacrifice by caring for their graves. U.S. Ambassador to the Netherlands, Joe Popolo, seemed to support the removal of the displays. The signs at Margraten are not intended to promote an agenda that criticizes America, he wrote on social media, following a visit to the cemetery after the controversy had erupted. Popolo declined a request for comment. The displays highlighted the sacrifices of black Americans. One display told the story of 23-year-old George H. Pruitt, a black soldier buried at the cemetery, who died attempting to rescue a comrade from drowning in 1945. The other described the U.S. policy of racial segregation in place during World War II. Some 1 million black soldiers enlisted in the U.S. military during the war, serving in separate units, mostly doing menial tasks, but also fighting in some combat missions. An all-black unit dug the thousands of graves in Margraten during the brutal 1944-45 season of famine in the German-occupied Netherlands, known in the Hunger Winter. Cor Linssen, the 79-year-old son of a black American soldier and a Dutch mother, is one of those who opposes the removal of the panels. Linssen grew up some 30 miles away from the cemetery, and although he didn't learn who his father was until later in life, he knew he was the son of a black soldier. When I was born, the nurse thought something was wrong with me because I was the wrong color, he told the Associated Press. I was the only dark child at school. Linssen, together with a group of other children of black soldiers, now all in their 70s and 80s, visited the cemetery in February 2025 to see the panels. It's an important part of history, Linssen said. They should put the panels back. The decision was based on Trump's DEI policies. After months of mystery around the disappearance of the panels, 2 media organizations, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, or JTA, and online media Dutch News, this month published emails obtained through a U.S. Freedom of Information Act request showing that Trump's DEI policies directly prompted the commission to take down the panels. The White House did not respond to queries from AP about the removed panels. The American Battle Monuments Commission did not respond to queries from AP about the revelations. Earlier, the ABMC told the AP that the panel that discussed segregation did not fall within the commemorative mission. It also said that the panel about Pruitt was rotated out. The replacement panel features Leslie Loveland, a white soldier killed in Germany in 1945, who is buried at Margraten. Chair of the Black Liberators Foundation and Dutch Senator Theo Bovens said his organization, which pushed for the inclusion of the panels at the visitor center, was not informed that they were removed. He told AP it is strange that the U.S. Commission feels the panels are not in their mission as they placed them in 2024. Something has changed in the United States, he said. Bovens, who is from the region around Margraten, is one of thousands of locals who tend to the graves at the cemetery. People who adopt a grave visit it regularly and leave flowers on the fallen soldier's birthday and other holidays. The responsibility is often passed down through Dutch families, and there is a waiting list to adopt graves of the U.S. soldiers. The locals remember the sacrifices of the black soldiers. Both the city and the province where the cemetery is located have demanded the panels be returned. In November, a Dutch television program recreated the panels and installed them outside the cemetery, where they were quickly removed by police. The show is now seeking a permanent location for them. The Black Liberators is also looking to find a permanent location for a memorial for the black soldiers who gave their lives to free the Dutch. On America Square, in front of the Edston Margraten City Hall, there is a small park named for Jefferson Wiggins, a black soldier who, at age 19, dug many of the graves at Margraten when he was stationed in the Netherlands. In his memoir, published posthumously in 2014, he describes burying the bodies of his white comrades, who he was barred from fraternizing with while they were alive. When black soldiers came to Europe in the Second World War, what they found was people who accepted them, who welcomed them, who treated them as the heroes that they were. And that includes the Netherlands, said Linda Herville, whose book Forgotten chronicles black soldiers who fought on D-Day and segregation they faced back home. The removal of the panels, she said, follows a historical pattern of writing out the stories of men and women of color in the United States. China's top diplomat blasts U.S. arms sales to Taiwan as military drills around the island unfold. China's foreign minister on Tuesday slammed a record U.S. arms sale to Taiwan as Beijing conducted the second day of military drills around the island it has long claimed as its own. Wang Yi, the most senior Chinese official to comment on the sale so far, also blasted the pro-independent forces in Taiwan and Japan's leaders during an end-of-the-year diplomatic event in Beijing. In response to the continuous provocations by pro-independence forces in Taiwan and large-scale U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, we must resolutely oppose and strongly counter them, Wang said while reviewing a year of diplomacy by Asia's largest and most influential nation. He reiterated China's aim for a complete reunification with Taiwan, a self-ruled island that split from China during the Civil War in 1949 and evolved into a multi-party democracy. Taiwan's government argues the island was never part of China in its current form under the Communist Party, and Beijing's sovereignty claims are illegitimate. Military package rankles China. The package, valued at more than $11 billion that was announced earlier this month by the U.S. State Department, amounts to the largest U.S. arms sale to Taiwan. It includes missiles, drones, artillery systems, and military software. The U.S. is obligated by its own laws to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. President Donald Trump has ramped up pressure on the self-ruled island to buy more U.S. military equipment, even suggesting Taiwan should spend up to 10% of its GDP on defense. China responded to the sale by launching 2 days of military drills around Taiwan on Monday. The exercises also are largely seen as a rebuke to Sanae Takaishi, the new Japanese prime minister, who inflamed Beijing last month by implying Japan could militarily intervene over Taiwan. Japan, which launched the war of aggression against China, not only fails to deeply reflect on the numerous crimes it committed, but its current leaders also openly challenge China's territorial sovereignty, the historical conclusions of World War II, and the post-war international order, Wang said, adding that China must be highly vigilant against the resurgence of Japanese militarism. Other diplomatic initiatives reviewed. In his speech reviewing China's diplomatic highlights for the year, Wang also mentioned Israel's war in Gaza, welcoming international efforts to facilitate a ceasefire, but insisting that more needs to be done. The world still owes Palestine justice, Wang said. The Palestinian question cannot be marginalized again, and the Palestinian people's cause for democratic and legitimate rights cannot end in vain. China maintains strong relations with Israel and the Palestine Authority and backs the two-state solution, under which Israel and Palestine would exist as independent states. Wang also emphasized China's aim to facilitate a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. Beijing says it is impartial in the war, but in practice signals support for Moscow through frequent state visits and joint military drills. Wang mediated talks between top diplomats from Thailand and Cambodia earlier this week, which the leaders said helped consolidate a ceasefire between the two neighbors after months of fighting. The meetings represented China's latest efforts to strengthen its role as an international mediator, and particularly its influence in Asian regional crises. As China grows into an economic and political force globally, Beijing has spent the past decade and more working in various ways to increase its voice as a third party in diplomatic matters. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 30th issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.